In chapter 15 of my book, Step 4, A Journey Through Addiction, I write about another attempt at rehab and how my family showed up to my house with an enormous amount of friends to give me an intervention. I made it through this chapter fairly well. It wasn't really until I started to sit down to write chapter 16 that I began to struggle. I came home from that rehabilitation center on a medication I started to abuse. And when I made the decision to quit using the medication, I entered a season of loneliness. So I titled the chapter Lonely. I remember titling the chapter Lonely, and just by writing that word, I was moved with so much emotion that I began to cry. And when the tears started to fall, I got up from my computer and walked away. I was sitting in an empty apartment when I began to write the most difficult chapter of my life. The chapter that I titled Lonely, while I was sitting alone in a 950 square foot apartment. And I was so afraid that revisiting this chapter was going to drive me back into the depression that loneliness drove me into at that point in time in my life. So this episode, we're going to dive into the most difficult chapter that I had to write when reliving my time in addiction while writing my book, Step 4. This episode of The Recovery Couch is brought to you by my friend J.B. Davis at Performance Chrysler Jeep Dodge Ram. For integrity, service, and unbeatable deals, ask for J.B. in Centerville and tell them The Recovery Couch sent you. Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to The Recovery Couch. You are listening to Inside the Fire Behind Step 4, a 12-part miniseries where I take you behind the scenes of my new book, Step 4, A Journey Through Addiction. It will be releasing this fall. Today's episode is about the chapter that almost broke me, to be completely honest with you, and that was chapter 16, and the title of that chapter is Lonely. So chapter 16 was the hardest chapter for me to write because it forced me to relive the season of my life where I felt truly alone. I called this chapter Lonely because that's exactly what it was. That month and the months that followed were a blur of isolation, depression, and self-destruction. I would spend entire days hiding under blankets, motionless, letting the entire world pass me by while I would scroll through YouTube. My bills piled up, my life fell apart, and I couldn't see a way out. I was abusing my Suboxone prescription, and when that wasn't enough to numb the emptiness, I turned to my Ritalin prescription, snorting lines, chasing any spark of the life that I just desperately wanted to feel. And although it worked for a moment, the highs eventually faded, and the darkness always came back, oftentimes heavier, like quicksand, just pulling me under. For about 3 months, I merely existed. No purpose, no hope, just me, the pills, and the walls of that lonely house. I eventually picked up some work with my cousin, thinking maybe some structure would save me, but instead, that job became the bridge to my next fall. I went from Suboxone and Ritalin to cocaine, and then one night, someone showed up at my door with crystal meth. I didn't hesitate. I said yes, and in that moment, my life changed forever. That night was the spark that lit the fire of my deepest and darkest spiral. Writing this chapter was like ripping open a wound that I thought I healed, but I knew that I had to include it because someone out there needs to know that they're not the only one who's ever felt that lonely. So lonely that they've reached for the hardest drugs, so lonely that they accepted invitations to try the hardest drug. So someone out there can relate and understand that I'm not just a guy who was given some platform, some podcast, some book opportunity, that I was once just like them, lost in the bowels of addiction with overdose and using heavy narcotics, and that there is hope and there is a way out. This episode of The Recovery Couch is brought to you by True Story Media. True Story Media is a faith-driven media company helping people share their stories with boldness and purpose. If you've got a testimony, a book idea, or even a podcast you've been dreaming about, True Story Media can help you bring it to life. Learn more at www.recoverycouch.com. Just want to remind everybody, don't forget to join the Recovery Couch Inner Circle on Patreon. There you'll get exclusive content, including Q&A sessions, behind-the-scenes stories, and bonus episodes with special guests. And speaking of guests, we have just recorded some incredible episodes with the likes of Michael Thompson, the author of The Heart of a Warrior, and Ryan Canaday, executive director and lead pastor of Free Recovery Community in Denver. You don't want to miss these conversations. Go and check them out. You can listen to them wherever you get your podcasts, and they're also available on YouTube. Chapter 16. I titled it Lonely. This was the chapter where the fire almost consumed me, but it also reminded me why I tell my story, so no one ever feels like they're facing the darkness alone. So stick around for episode 3, because there's more behind this story than you could ever imagine. And remember, you always have a seat right here on the Recovery Couch. This episode of the Recovery Couch is brought to you by Greg Swartz at Remax Victory and Affiliates. Whether you're buying or selling your home, Greg brings heart, hustle, and honesty to every deal. Call Greg at 937-477-8975 today. In this episode, we talked about Chapter 16 of my upcoming book, Step 4, A Journey Through Addiction. I titled Chapter 16, Lonely, because it was the chapter that nearly broke me. I shared how I spent months isolated under blankets, abusing Suboxone and Ritalin just to feel anything. I relived the moment I slipped up from prescriptions to cocaine and finally got to crystal meth, which was the spark that ignited my deepest spiral. Writing and even talking about this chapter has forced me to confront the raw pain of that season. But it also reminds me why I tell my story, so no one ever feels that alone in the darkness. Just remember, you're never too far gone, you're never too broken or too addicted for an unbelievable comeback story, and you always have a seat right here on the Recovery Couch.